Well, hello and a very warm welcome to you all. My name is Mark Morley, and this is the IT Business Partner Playbook, a new series where I'll be joined every week by business partners and business relationship managers from around the globe. In each episode, we open up space for real conversations about the work, the role, and the relationships that define what it means to be a BRM or an IT business partner today. No scripts, just honest insights and shared experiences. Before we jump into today's conversation, I've just got two quick asks. Firstly, if you've got any thoughts or ideas or feedback about the podcast, I'd love to hear them, whether it's in the comments or directly to me. Your input really helps us shape the kinds of conversations that we have on here. So if there's a topic you want us to dig into, please do let me know. Secondly, if you're finding value in these episodes, please hit the subscribe button and give us a thumbs up. It helps us reach more BRMs and IT business partners out there and grow this community of shared learning. So on to today's podcast. I'm delighted to be joined by Alina Chin, a BRM based in Canada. Like so many of our guests, Alina has spent time in a number of roles before finding BRM. So I'm looking forward to hearing what excited Alina about the role and what her plans are for the future. So good morning to you, Alina. Thanks so much for joining us today. Can I head over to you for a quick intro, and then we can go on to discuss your experiences and thoughts as a BRM, as a role and as a culture?
Sure. I thank you, Mark, for having me. I'm quite honored that you reached out to me for my input. So happy to share with the larger community.
Nice.
Just a general intro of myself. Very quick overview of my career path. I started out in positions where, first interacting with the public, customer relations, and then sort of transitioning into the business side of things, where you're moving on to dealing with corporate clients, and then eventually to larger stakeholders. So my most recent role is IT business relationship manager. So right now, currently, I am in between jobs, transitioning from one role and looking for my next opportunity. In terms of the role itself, Mark, feel free to sort of guide me as
what kind of led you into that role to start with? Because you had if you could speak about the roles you did prior to BRM, gives us a kind of a feel for your background, and then what attracted you to the BRM role that you're in last.
Sure. Beginning of my career, I worked for a large telecommunications firm. Started out, while I was still in school, in fact, dealing with, the public and just very, very basic customer service. And I think that was sort of the beginning of my path, because from that particular position, I learned that I enjoyed working with people, interacting with people. And, as you learn to sort of manage expectations and deal with, the good and the not so good, it kind of builds that foundation for where I am today, right? So from that role, sort of transitioned into other roles. I spent a number of years abroad in the Caribbean. So yeah, I worked in a management capacity down there too at a firm. That particular position was more dealing with distributors on a wholesale level. So although I wasn't dealing with the actual end user customer, it was just more dealing with, the inner workings of a business in terms of making sure the supply chain was maintained. If there were any sort of issues with supply, dealing with the retail side of it as well to make sure that, things were moving smoothly. So from that, when I returned to Canada, I sort of transitioned back into more of the business side of things. So, moving into more a role where the last role I had was I found was immense growth for me and very satisfying, because I was sort of brought into this company to sort of build up BRM Function, which has never existed in any sort of capacity. So it was a pretty interesting situation, because what was shared at the time was that the relationship between IT and the rest of the business units within the organization was quite fractured and not working the way it should be working. So, it was really quite interesting, because, I came into this organization, no playbook to work with. There wasn't any sort of like previous way of doing things, or, someone that held the role before and said, well, this is how far we got, and this is where you want to pick up the baton and move it on. So really, I started out with the whole very getting down to the bare bones basics again of building up those relationships, right? Building the bridges where the bridges had either never existed or were broken, right? So, got to a stage where, we managed to turn it around, develop a reasonable degree of trust, with some groups, and with other groups, really moved the needle to make it a very positive experience, right? So that, some of these business units who were, the largest stakeholders felt more comfortable, more positive about working with IT.
Okay.
So, moving from that, of course, your natural transition from that point would be more to shift it to more strategy focused, right? So I think that's pretty much where we sort of ended it.
Yep.
And here I am, sort of moving on and looking for my next position. Yeah, it's been quite the journey. I mean, I don't want to, sort of bore yourself and the viewers with some unnecessary detail there, but that's pretty much it.
Well, I mean, this is. I mean, I would love to hear more about what has happened since. I mean, as much as what you were doing. So it's interesting that the role was new when you moved into it, because we've seen that with a number of our guests that this has been a new role that they've moved into, and like you say, you can't take over from someone. You can't learn what they were doing and then do that and then improve on it. You're just really given a blank sheet of paper and said, this is kind of what we need. Can you figure out how to do it? So love to hear more about how you kind of found your way to do that, but also what has happened since, because sadly, and maybe it's because I'm kind of immersed in this field, that I'm aware of a lot of BRMs that are in the transition, unfortunately, that there's, I guess, there's tricky times out there, and unfortunately the roles that are less understood are the ones that go first. So there are a number of people looking for new roles, and we did a special episode with James a few weeks ago where he was trying to help share his own experiences to help other people that are going through the same thing. But just to go back to when you started in this last role, I mean, where did you find guidance? They said that, we need a BRM, and you are now it. How did you figure out kind of what you were going to do, how you were going to bring value to that role and the organization?
Right. When this last organization I was at, when I actually got hired on, it wasn't hired on as the BRM. I started at a lower role and sort of transitioned into the BRM function about 6 or 7 months after my start date. So really,
Okay.
when I first came on board, the main mandate I was given at the time was, IT was trying to sort of turn things around. There are a lot of processes that management realized wasn't working so well. There were a lot of silos. Never mind, the whole broken down relationship aspect of it too. So, originally when I stepped in, it was really to sort of examine, at a ground level, where the weaknesses were in terms of processes. Are there broken processes that, perhaps the higher ups are not fully aware of, right? That need to be fine tuned, or if processes didn't exist, maybe create those processes. So I went through all that, and then, I got to a stage where they were like, okay, you know what? We have a need for this, so let's make you the BRM. So then from that point on, as I mentioned earlier, because I didn't really have a playbook to work with, it was more of me sort of sitting back looking at the whole picture, because it's no longer just IT now. I had to look at all the business units, and there were 12 in total, right across the organization, right? So I thought, okay, so what's the best way to sort of start it? I kind of thought, okay, you know what? The best thing to do is really, first and foremost, to have those conversations with the leaders right at the top for each of those business units. So, I spoke to my own boss, who was one of the directors in IT at the time. And he was very supportive, of the direction I was taking. And I thought, okay, so, let's do this. So what we did was both himself and I, because it was almost like cold calling, when you're trying to sell something, sales and whatnot. The only difference is now you're sort of cold calling to sort of reach out to business units that perhaps, may not necessarily want to speak to IT in some cases, right? So
Who does want to speak to cold callers? So
yes, exactly. It's like that whole thing when you get the telemarketers or the people coming ringing at your door, would you like to buy this, right? So I had to have my sort of 2-minute sales pitch, in a sense, to say, hey, I'm sorry, you don't know who I am. Let me introduce myself. Let me introduce, what it is we're trying to do here in IT. I know it's something completely new that perhaps you've never seen or heard of before, but, let's sort of pause and hear out what we're trying to do here. So, with that being said, I scheduled meetings, when I started out as the BRM, with each of the senior leaders. So you're talking to C-levels, right? And then directors, to say, okay, this is what we're trying to do. we're open and we're sincere about trying to sort of fix things that didn't work before. So let's sort of, meet in the middle ground and try and work together on this. And, we had a lot of very positive feedback from that level. I mean, there was with certain groups, there was a little bit of, reserve there. And I understood because I was sort of given sort of the lay of the land before I started this journey. So, when we had those conversations and sort of said, okay, well, this is how we're planning to sort of move in this direction. This is how we're going to do this. Now, from your point of view as the C-level, for each of the respective teams, who is it that you would like me to sort of engage with on a regular basis to get these conversations going, right? Would you like me to speak to you directly? Or are there other members on your team that report into you who should be primed for this? So, with that particular conversation, what I did was I set up regular cadence meetings with the respective individuals in each team to say, okay, well, this is what we're looking at. The first few meetings was more just a whole notion of, first of all, getting them to the table because, again, there was some reluctance with certain groups of wanting to come to a meeting with IT. It was just more like, why are you calling us now?
Yeah.
What do you want from us? And, what is this really all about? So, when I was able to get these teams to the table, and it's just more, the first few sessions were just a general overview and introduction to make everybody comfortable. There wasn't any sort of sitting there and saying, here's my agenda, and it's very formal, very structured. I structured it in a way where, it's sort of like what you and I are having, Mark, just a very informal conversation, everything on the table, and nobody has to feel, suspicious or guarded, right? Because that's really not the purpose of the meetings. So at these meetings, what I did was, sort of have a conversation with the members that were in attendance to say, okay, what did you see as the previous pain points with IT? What worked? What didn't work? What do you think we should be doing, right? And are there particular deliverables that are impacting your own operations in your shop that are, related to IT? So, we kind of I took all that back and sat down and said, okay, after we had these meetings, I circled back with my own boss and respective members of IT that need to have this knowledge, including our CIO, to say, okay, this is what's the feedback that's coming back. And for a lot of them on the IT side, it was just, oh, really? They felt that way? Well,
All right.
we feel this way.
Yeah.
So, I became very much sort of like that middle person to sort of bridge the conversation because, as a lot of BRMs will probably tell you, oftentimes IT and business, they don't speak the same language.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. And that's where a lot of the broken communication silos and problems kind of root because there's a lack of understanding on each side of the fence in terms of what the other side has to do to deliver for the other person. Right. So it's a matter of finding that understanding and compromise to sort of move forward.
Yeah.
So, after I had these sort of conversations and we sort of identified what the issues were, it was just more at the beginning going after what they call low-hanging fruit, right? The simple things relatively that have been festering for maybe years that really should be a quick fix within IT, if it just never got the visibility. I went and just sort of made arrangements to knock all of those off for each team that I dealt with. That's where the trust started to build.
Yeah.
So, that, of course, with 12 business units and me being the sole BRM, it takes a bit of time.
Yeah.
So, we went down that path and then,
Sorry to interrupt, but did you find, were you kind of working with like one business unit at a time to knock off those problems, or did you have all of the problems that you?
all of them.
Okay.
All of them at once. It was just more, I didn't give much thought to the fact that I was the sole BRM supporting 12 business units. And I know, during my time that I was working, I was also attending meetings with the Business Relationship Institute that I believe is based in the U.S., the licensing body for our profession. And, through that forum, I managed to sort of meet some other BRMs that are based in the U.S. And, quite a number of them have said to me, hold on, you're supporting 12? Usually, you have a team of BRMs to support.
Yeah.
The only one? I was like, I guess so.
Yeah.
I've been busy enough that I haven't really given it much thought. And so, it's a lot of keeping multiple balls, juggled and up in the air and making sure nothing sort of falls, right? So yes, to answer your question, Mark, it was everything all at once, right?
Right. Yeah, that must have been a challenge. But did you find that if you were having successes, or as those quick wins start to be recognized, that the kind of word was spreading, that people maybe that were difficult to talk to had kind of realized, well, actually, no, Alina can help us. She's helped these other guys. And so did you find that there was kind of word was spreading, and support for you was growing?
Yes, yes. Actually, it's quite interesting because, obviously some of these conversations happen at a much higher level with the higher ups, right? And I was sort of hear back from my own boss, who may be part of these meetings. He said, yeah, like the feedback has been great. What he has said to me is that he was surprised at how well it's sort of taken off,
Right.
right? That, that we were sort of getting those doors open now. It's not just, shut and only open like an inch or two, is, open to hearing about what IT is going to do. And now, when we have problems, we know who it is that we can approach and share the feedback with. Some of these teams, because they feel like they may not have visibility, but, the senior leadership team in IT, much less the CIO, just felt that, what, finally it's good that we now have a way to have our voice be shared amongst the
Yeah.
team.
Yeah. Yeah, and we hear that a lot, and we've kind of realized that when we first started getting involved with BRM, BRMs are really like kind of marriage guidance counselors, or translators, because you have two functions that work very well in their own rights, but just for some reason over the last 20 or 30 years just don't seem to be able to talk to each other properly. And even, I mean, we worked with a bank here in South Africa, sorry, where for a long time, IT were actually in the basement of the buildings. So,
Ah,
yeah, so it kind of trying to bring IT into the business was physical for them, because they were actually brought out of the basement and put onto one of the higher levels. But it was that mentality, that siloed mentality, where you've got two very different functions, or IT is different from every other function. For some reason, it's like IT was a mysterious black box that only a specific group of people would understand, and so it needed an intermediary. It needed someone to be able to step into the middle and say, well, actually, your people and your people just kind of talk a little different, but if we can get to understand both what you're trying to say, what your needs are, then we can marry that with what these capabilities are. So we find BRM is commonly that's what they do, is they just try to speak a common language.
very true. You're the bridge that kind of
Yeah.
holds the sides together.
Mm. And have you found that there's a lot of people that you're speaking to, or that you were speaking to, that kind of had never spoken to each other before, that you were kind of building relationships not just with yourself and your partners, but elsewhere in the business, that you were kind of bringing other people together?
Absolutely. One of the main things I heard, to that respect, is a lot of people, not just on the IT side, but also, within each of the respective business units, don't know who the teams are,
Mm.
who it is they need to contact for, whatever purpose, right? So it's almost like, well, I've had, someone, a senior leader, in fact, in another business unit, say to me that, IT is like behind an iron curtain. You cannot get through to them when you need something.
Yeah.
You don't know how to get through to them. And it's almost like when you need to, do something or install something or change something that requires IT support, it's almost like you throw something out there and hope that it gets through the iron curtain and hope that it lands, with the right person.
Yeah.
And, conversely, on the IT side of it, with the various teams, our IT department, first of all, is quite huge for the organization that I worked for. A lot of the leaders I've spoken to on the IT side, we're also quite curious too, because they're, like their counterparts in the other business units, there are times that they're not even sure who it is that they're supposed to be dealing with,
Yeah.
and who it is that they would need to contact. Conversely, if IT or their team respectively needed something from particular groups within the organization.
Did you find, because a lot of what you're describing is I guess what we would call transactional, operational stuff, things that are not working that need to be fixed, and then once you get past that stage, you can start looking at kind of more exciting things. Did you find that people were sharing with you, this is kind of our vision, this is what we're trying to get to. Can you help us do that? Can you help
Oh,
us?
yes. Yes, no, absolutely. I think once I got past that initial relationship building stage, where, you know, they started to see tangible results from having regular cadence meetings, then, the conversations did sort of go down that path for each business unit that I sort of dealt with. It's more, okay, well, this is what we're looking forward to, and this is what we're planning to do. Is there any way that, we can ensure that in the future that, there isn't a roadblock thrown up for us because IT is not ready or they're not able to deliver for whatever reason. So, that kind of leads a lot more to the strategy part of the role itself, right? And that's really where, the most impact, if you will, for BRM lies is just, the ability to just sort of guide strategy and also guide how things are done and delivered, which is critical in any business.
Yeah. Did you spend much time trying to help align resources, or because we found wherever we go, there's always competition for resources, whether it's time or budget. There's always multiple projects going along, and you often find that projects are conflicting, but because there's no oversight, that no one can uncover that. Is that something that you found once you were in the BRM role, that you were finding that there were other competing or conflicting?
All the time.
Right.
All the time. I think, that's probably a constraint that runs right across the board for any organization, any industry. That it always, your issues, one of your big issues will always be, that of resources and budget, resources, budget, or even, our manpower for that matter.
Yeah.
So I know, particularly with this last position I held, that was a huge pressure point, right? Because I know a lot of the frustration that was shared with me by the other business units was just the fact that, each individual business unit, they have their own deliverable that they have to deliver upon, right? With or without IT. And that's part of their role that fits in under the whole umbrella. What I heard was that a lot of the times in the past, they would, whether they're launching a project or rolling out something that needs IT support, they were having problems getting timely feedback from IT, in terms of the intake process. Does this make it on the docket for a priority for this year? Is it part of the roadmap? And then also, if we're even for simpler things that may not necessarily be large scale projects, but things that sort of, help their own internal operations. Why is it that when we reach out to IT to say that we need this, all of a sudden, they come back last minute and say, no, can't be done, period, door closed. No further conversation. Yeah. And on the IT side of it, when I speak to, the respective team leads for these teams that would be supporting the various initiatives, their frustration centers around, well, how did we even intake this? Was this even submitted properly, for it to be scoped properly? The project leads or whoever's primed for this on the other side of the fence that is coming up with this project, they've never come to us to say, hey, this is what is needed.
Yeah.
And yet, they don't understand, and this is coming from the financial part of it too, is that there is a cost involved that's coming out of, usually IT budget for certain initiatives. And, they're coming to us at the very end of the budget year when you're tipping the scale into the red. So of course we can't deliver on this. It's like, this should have been communicated to us early on in the game so that we can look at it to say, okay, this isn't going to work because A, B, and C, but that was never done. So this is the kind of feedback I'm sort of getting from both sides of the fence.
Okay. Did you spend much time then, because talking about the financial aspects, did you spend much time kind of educating people that, when you're looking at these projects, there are certain things you must consider, and this is one of them. So things that you might think people would normally be cognizant of, they should be thinking about this, that they weren't, and that's where you could come in and help them, and then obviously helps them ongoing, for future projects.
Mm-hmm. Yes, for that particular stage of it, usually what I would do is I would have a meeting held that would include whoever the project prime is going to be on the business side. And, based on what it is they're looking to do, I would sort of circle back internally within IT and bring on board to this meeting the leaders for the teams that would have to be on board to support that. So that way, all the relevant people are at the table together, right? Because, as the BRM, you can't always be the subject matter expert for every single technical detail. So, especially when at the beginning stages, when they're looking at, establishing strategy and roadmap, there needs to be clarity from the get-go, right, to help with the planning process. So that way, when I have these members at the table, they get the feedback right away. It would be, okay, well, this is IT, this is what we're looking at for 2025. We're looking to do this by first quarter, second quarter, third quarter. And then the respective members on the IT side would probably be looking at this and say, okay, let me just take a look at this first, take this back to my team if needed, and decide, first of all, do we have the manpower to support it? Do we have the budget dollars to support it, right?
Yeah.
These are the considerations that, you as the business might need to bear in mind if you decide to go down this path. It may or may not work for these reasons. So that's the stage that we were at.
And was anyone recording any of this information? I mean, did you end up with a document that was like the oversight of these programs, or was it?
I would be the one facilitating and recording at the same time, and I'd be going to circle back into the meeting notes so that everybody is sort of on board. There would also be like an action register where everything's sort of logged. So then that way, when we have the next follow-up meeting, people can sort of see, okay, well, this is where we left off, and these were the meeting takeaways from the previous meeting. So that way, it sort of keeps everything moving along.
Yeah. It's interesting because I've spoken to a few BRMs now that have effectively become the investment or portfolio managers because no one was doing it earlier. And this is such a critical role. And when we're looking at BRM and trying to justify, what's the ROI for this role, I've spoken to a number of guys where a number of people that have said, we had the pipeline that we looked at and there was, everything coming into the funnel. We've managed to rationalize it and we've saved millions of dollars by not, going through with these projects or postponing or, pausing projects that weren't going anywhere. They weren't going to deliver business value, or there was something else that was going to deliver more value. So the BRM has been really critical in the way that they've saved money and the money that has been spent has been, better invested. So this is something I think is one of the standout features of a BRM, is that they can do this in the absence of a portfolio manager. And then I always talk to people about kind of what tools to use as a BRM. And this is, I think, having this oversight and this dashboard of programs that are running, I think is something that is unique to a BRM. And something that adds incredible value. So I think this is something that any BRMs that aren't doing this, I think, should try and get involved in, because I think it's a great way of demonstrating the value that you're bringing to the business. It's clearly, yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that the one interesting thing I find with the BRM function is you wear many hats. You're not just simply a project manager, although there are some elements of project management that is necessary as part of the role. But there's also the negotiation part. There's also, conflict resolution. You wear many hats all under one umbrella as the BRM. So I think, a lot of the value of the role is realized, as long as, depending on from organizational standpoint, where you roll under, whether you're on the IT side or business side. The important thing is that, your senior management team that you report into understands how the BRM function fits into their operations, right? And as long as they see value and support that, then it paves the road for you to sort of really clear that path towards, a better productivity and performance.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's, I think, sadly, and we discussed this earlier briefly, that, BRM and business partners are often, maybe seen as expendable, when things get tight. And so this is, they're teams that are among the first to go. And I often find that it's where the role isn't understood, where the organization doesn't kind of value it and doesn't understand it. In your organization, you were quite new to this role. The role was new itself, and you were demonstrating all this value, but then it didn't continue. So do you mind talking maybe about what happened at the end of that role?
There was a reorg at my organization, which tends to happen a lot. And the original CIO that I started with was one that I worked with well, understood the value of it, was supportive of it. He unfortunately left the organization, so his replacement came in with a mindset that this was just not something that would be a priority from a business standpoint, right? So to your point, yes, unfortunately, when you're talking about, business decisions and, if there's budgetary pressure, right, for them to sort of cut costs and really run it lean,
Yeah.
you know, obviously what they're going to look at is the nice to haves, right? The things that
Yeah.
are, oh, you know what, it's not really may not necessarily be the backbone of the operations. This is like, the padding that kind of
Mhm.
helps look nicer or run
Yeah.
better. If worst comes to worst, we can do without. So, I think
This is
that's really what it was.
and this is what I find such a shame because I mean, as we've spoken about, I mean, your business partners, well, I'm sure have vouched for you. You're bringing a lot of value to them. You're kind of making connections that have never been there before. You're making people aware of things that are, important that no one was aware of before. And as I've spoken about, some of the other BRMs I've spoken to, save millions of dollars during the year.
Mm.
Um, you know, if you get rid of that person, you're not going to save millions of dollars by getting rid of that one or two people. So it's often, I think, extremely short-sighted of new people that come in.
Yeah.
I guess they want to make some quick cost savings rather than figuring out how to demonstrate the value of a team. It's easier for them and quicker for them to demonstrate the cost that was saved by getting rid of them, and
Yeah.
it's a real shame.
It
And
is. It
and
is.
and this is something that I'm hoping, as the more BRMs that we talk to, the more organizations that we talk to, that we can find a way to kind of make it clear to the executives and to people that have these decisions to make that cutting the BRM team is not going to be, it's not going to be the fix that you think it is. It's going to ultimately cost a lot more than you think you're saving.
Yeah.
Uh,
No, you're absolutely right, Mark. I think a lot of it too is just more a BRM, an effective one, becomes almost like the eyes and the ears for the CIO or whoever it is that they roll under, right? Because when you're talking about senior, executive level management, they have to look at the whole lay of the land, right?
mm,
And they may not necessarily have that time or bandwidth or
yeah,
capacity to be looking at the smaller parts of the
yeah,
puzzle
yeah,
that are critical, to help them drive their vision.
yeah,
And I think that's where the BRM steps in to sort of
yeah,
fill in, those voids, right?
mm,
Because it's more the things that may be brewing with your business
yeah,
partners or your stakeholders that
yeah,
you sitting up here may not necessarily be aware of, or maybe
absolutely.
perhaps it's not coming out at your level when you're having your meetings with your counterparts. It's hard to say, right?
Yeah,
The BM, if they are leveraging their role, the way they should be and effectively, would be able to capture that early on to say, hey, you know what, this particular team, or stakeholder is looking at this down the line. Now, this, if we don't get ahead of it, is going to impact operations in our house by A, B, C, and D, right? So although you may not necessarily need to sit there and literally piece it all together for the higher ups, I mean, the fact that, you've gotten wind of this and it's something that, perhaps on our side of the house, we need to consider when we're doing the road mapping sessions. That's invaluable information,
yeah,
right? And by having that, it prevents the year-end budget crunch where everybody's unhappy,
mm, yeah,
right? Because all of a sudden there are some unexpected, asks that in some cases may be critical, and you may not have a choice but to sort of
mm,
put everything aside to address that,
yeah,
right? And
yeah,
really, in the whole scheme of things, is that an effective way of running the business?
yeah. Yeah, and always it makes me think of the image I've seen on LinkedIn a million times where someone's pushing a square up the hill and someone says, maybe you should cut it into a circle and then push it up. But they're like, no, I don't have time for that. And
Yeah.
the thing is, you have so many people in the business that have deliverables. They have something they have to deliver. So they have to deliver it and they don't have time to look outside of it because they can't immediately see how it's going to help them deliver. Whereas when you've got a business partner or a business relationship manager who can, it's their job to stand back and make sure they understand everything that's going on. They know what the strategy is. They can see all the moving pieces and how it's moving towards that. Those are the people that, as you've said, they can take the time to focus on the things that other people aren't focusing on,
Right.
and ultimately, deliver these projects that are going to deliver more value and rein in those ones that aren't. So it's a constant frustration for us as people looking in, but for people like yourself who are caught in the middle of this, must be incredibly frustrating, because you've been there. You know what value you're delivering. You've got business partners that are kind of relieved to have you here, and they're so grateful that you're around. And then a change of management, and away you go.
Yes, yes, and it's you're right about that, Mark. It is quite frustrating because you see the fruit of your labor, and basically the changes that you were able to implement in a positive way, right? And
Yeah.
yes, various business partners and stakeholders, they themselves commented that it's great. They're glad that this is now happening, and that they feel that IT is finally taking the right direction,
Yeah.
right? But then. Yeah, when these decisions are made, it's really hard because I'm sure a lot of other BRMs that you've spoken to probably feel the same way, because a lot of us, we take great pride in what we do, right?
Yeah.
It's part of what makes you successful, and for you to sort of have that vision and that understanding of how everything sort of fits into the larger picture. That's something that should be leveraged, right? Because if you're a senior leader, you do have your hands full trying to drive strategy, trying to steer your department or business unit to a certain direction. There's not a whole lot of time to look at the the little pieces of the puzzle that you need to be aware of when you're sort of looking at strategy.
Yeah. As a company that offers training consulting around this, we see executive sponsorship as a big issue. So we try to spend a lot of time meeting with these people to kind of explain the benefits of the capability, to try and avoid this kind of thing happening. But it's difficult to reach those people. It's difficult to start up those conversations. So we obviously spend a lot of time with BRMs, and the training that we offer, we can teach people how to become good BRMs, what kind of tools and practices to use. But as someone who's been in this position, do you have any thoughts about what you could do in your position to kind of help, I don't know, spread the word, evangelize about BRM, so that in the future, if in your next role, trying to just make your role more secure, so you can make sure that people at that level appreciate you more, and can understand what your role brings, just to kind of safeguard it a bit more? Do you have, because this is what we're continually trying to do to make sure that people understand the value. But is there anything you've thought of, as you've been going through this process, that maybe if I'd done this, or maybe if my boss had done that, we might have been, this role might have been better protected?
You mean for me personally, or you mean as a general?
Just you as a person in the role that you were in. Do you think maybe if someone else knew about this, or if I'd done something differently, maybe the role would have been more secure?
You know what? It's an interesting question, because I think a lot of it, first and foremost, what I would say is if you have somebody that is not familiar with what BRM is, or doesn't understand, how, what will it do for me, right?
Yeah.
Then I think first off, as the BRM, you should be, first and foremost, have that conversation early on in the game, right? So, in my case, if you're falling under the technology area in IT, then a BRM should have that conversation with whoever the senior leader is that's going to be driving operations and strategy. So that would usually be the CIO, right? So I think, to have those conversations first, to sort of, first of all, find out what their concerns and what their needs are, right? Because the value of your role is going to be really tied into how well you can deliver to support their goals, right? For overall department. Because if you're not supporting that, then that conversation is not going to happen or go anywhere.
Yeah.
So I think once you get that understanding, to have that conversation with that senior leader, then you can sort of explain, well, this is what we can do, or this is what I propose, and this is how it's going to help you, right? Now, taking that particular direction will help if you're dealing with someone who is open to hearing, what you have to say. So I think this is the part where it sort of tips the needle more into do I want to say a psychology part of it, because everybody, by human nature, you're going to come in with some preconceived notions of what you want, what you expect things to be, right?
Right.
So as long as you're dealing with somebody that is open to hearing about that, then you know what? The possibilities are there.
Yeah.
On the flip side of the coin, you could be unfortunate and have somebody that maybe it's their own personal experience or bias, or maybe they in the past role they did not see the full value of BRM. That's a slippery slope to be on, because then you can pitch whatever, right? But ultimately, the decision will lie with them to determine whether do I want to give the BRM role, a chance, to see whether it makes a meaningful impact for me, or is it like, no, absolutely, this doesn't work for me. I don't see any need to be spending budget dollars,
Yeah.
this. Then, it's a whole different conversation, right?
Yeah.
But no, definitely, support coming from senior level, first and foremost, is the most important thing, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, and I wondered, I've mentioned this a few times, so we know of BRM teams that really make a song and dance about what they do. So they'll create reports, they'll share results, they'll share things that they've been involved in. They'll kind of bring people in that they've had successes with. So they really are kind of trying to make it known, this is what we're doing, this is the impact we're having. And I wonder if that kind of helps. So if it comes to the crunch where one person leaves, a new person comes in and says, right, I'm going to get rid of this team, there are enough people that know about BRM and business partnering to say, oh, hang on a minute, if you get rid of this person or this team, all of this is going to stop happening. So I do wonder if kind of, and we know of one team that they do a quarterly report, and it's a big thing, and it's company wide, and they really do make a song and dance about it, and they're very successful as a BRM function. So I do wonder if that's something that might help in the future.
Oh yes, no, absolutely. I think we're at the beginning. I apologize. I should have included this when I was sort of explaining. When you are trying to justify the value of a BRM, right? And if you're coming at this from an angle of, are you dealing with somebody who has absolutely zero familiarity with what BRM is, or somebody that kind of knows what it is, but is sort of like on the fence, right?
Yeah.
Either way, the numbers are important. If you have strong metrics that you can present, strong results, measurable results that you can sort of present and say, well, this is what we came from, and this is where we are today, and it's a direct result of A, B, C, and D under the BRM function, right? So yes, to your point, that is important. I mean, you can sit there and try and sell to your best ability of, the nice part of BRM and whatnot. But, ultimately we all know that, especially at that level, they need to see the tangible results, right? And it helps if you have the support and feedback from the business partners as well to say, hey, no, you know what we like having this sort of connection, to IT or to a particular team. This BRM has done an amazing job, and no, we don't want to see this shelved, right?
Yeah.
Oh yes, no. To your point, very important. Definitely, if you have metrics or concrete results that you can demonstrate, that definitely should be part of the conversation.
All right. When just going back again to when you moved into this role that was new, you mentioned that you've got involved with the institute, so you're able to kind of take away from them. Well, what do you think was the things that helped the most that you're able to take from the institute or from the community that helped you kind of formalize the role and give you kind of a foundation to then build on?
Well, what I found that was really invaluable, I mean, aside from, having the forum and opportunity to sort of connect with other BRMs, and the role is also to connect with other senior BRMs that have actually gone down this very same path that you've gone down, and are able to share their experience. And I think what I personally found was invaluable was just the methodologies to look at, right? The steps that you should be taking if you are trying to move from, just being an order taker to being a strategic advisor, right?
Yeah.
All the steps are in between, how to measure. Those technical details, I think are critical and are important, because you want to be able to move the needle in a measurable way.
Yeah. Okay. Now you've been a BRM and you're looking in between roles, as you said, are you only focusing on BRM roles? Is that something you feel is something you're really kind of keen to continue, or are you also looking at other things?
I'm looking at other things as well. I do like the BRM aspect of it too, So I think a lot of it is just, as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of project management involved. So you can sort of veer in either direction, right? Because someone that actually has the BRM functions or skills under their belt, there's a number of directions you can go in, and no matter what field you're in, that relationship building aspect of it, that ability to sort of work with stakeholders or clients or even customers, it's an invaluable skill. So yeah, I'm not solely focusing myself to BRM. It is something that I am interested in for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, just sort of keeping my options open and
Sure.
being open to other areas, because that's the only way you can sort of grow your skill set, right?
Absolutely. The BRM roles that you have seen available, do they strike you as being the kind of BRM that you're familiar with, or do you see them being quite different? Maybe some are a lot more kind of tactical or a lot more operational.
A lot of it. Sorry.
I would say we see companies have often wildly different views of what BRM and business partnering is. And we see this from the job specs that we see on LinkedIn. So I'm just wondering your perspective. Have you seen that?
Yes. What I've been noticing lately is the actual BRM functions tend to be sort of encapsulated within project management itself, right? A lot of the job postings that I have seen seem to center a lot around emphasizing more the project management aspect of it, and perhaps then the sort of stakeholder and a relationship management part of it as a secondary part. Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is quite interesting. A lot of organizations may have different views of what a BRM should be, right? There are organizations that feel that, the BRM function shouldn't be a standalone function. It should be something that a project manager automatically does.
Yeah. This is something we've been discussing for a long time, is that it actually, to us, it kind of makes sense to have some BRM champions within one organization to then try and filter out throughout the organization. So it ends up becoming a culture that everyone is a BRM. Everyone has these relationship skills and ways to nurture relationships. So I think you don't necessarily need a big BRM team, but you definitely need people with BRM skill sets that can then kind of filter this out through the organization. I see we're kind of getting to the end of our time here, but I'm just interested. So vendor relationships, because we see now that companies more and more are relying on other companies to kind of fulfill their business requirements. So vendor relationships or vendor management is something we see BRM being really good, a good role to fulfill. Is that something you've seen or looked at, being a vendor manager internally?
In my most recent role, no. The main thrust of my role was more internal stakeholders, not so much external. And I think that kind of varies from organization to organization, right? Because the organization that I worked with, I think a lot of the vendor relationship management part of it was sort of handled by the respective product managers.
Right.
So again, it's going to depend on the organization that you work for, because it's a BRM function. It can cover internal, but it can also cover external, meaning clients and vendors as well. The basic way that you would be interacting with either, I think the very principles are the same across the board. There has to be that ability to be able to understand and hear, right? Like when you're dealing with, whether it's stakeholders or vendors, to really listen and understand what the other side is mentioning, what their concerns are, right? And that's how you build those bridges.
Yeah. Understanding what they need, not necessarily what they want.
Exactly. And I think at the end of the day, everybody wants to be heard. They're not complaining or speaking because they want to. It's because there's a legitimate need or issue that they just want to, first of all, make sure that it's being heard and that it's going to be actioned, right?
Yeah, that's good. Can I ask as a parting comment, what advice could you give to other people that are either starting out in a BRM role or in one now, but kind of struggling or need to develop some part of their capability to improve? Is there something that you mentioned earlier that from the Institute, you're able to gain some kind of skills and practices? What would you say people should focus on first, maybe as a quick win?
Well, if there's looking to just start out in a BRM function of in an official capacity, definitely look into the BRM Institute. They're a great resource, for all BRMs, in terms of getting methodologies, or even just getting feedback from others that have been in your shoes and perhaps have more experience. So, first and foremost, right there. Secondly, if you don't have project management under your belt, make sure you have a bit of that as well, because, as I mentioned a few times, BRM wears many hats. One of them is a project management hat, right? So you may not be a full-fledged project manager, while you're in the role, but there are going to be times where your job functions will have to involve some elements of project management. So that kind of really gives you that firm foundation. Also, critically important is when you're starting out, depending on what stage of relationship building or the maturity of the BRM function in the organization that you work for, you have to be able to stand back and take a look at the whole picture, right? So are you brought on board, first of all, to either fix toxic relationships or build relationships? Then, that goes back to you being able to sort of have that ability to sort of reach out, do the sort of cold calling, get in contact with the right people in the groups that you need to connect with, right? If the BRM function is at a more mature level where they've gone past that already and, you're sitting more at the strategic level, then again, it's a lot of the listening. This is where your soft skills are probably going to do a lot of the heavy lifting for you, more so than your technical skills, because it's those soft skills that are going to build that trust and bring people to the table and have them feel confident and comfortable sitting and sharing with you what it is you're looking to do. And you need to be able to take that information back to your own team, right, wherever the BRM role resides, and be able to disseminate it from there at that point on and move forward. So I think that would be it in a nutshell.
Okay. I really like that quote. It's your soft skills that do the heavy lifting. I will have to use that again. I like that. Well, listen, Alina, thanks so much for sharing your experiences and your insights with us. It's been a real pleasure to chat to you today, and thank you again for your time. There's a lot I find in each of these episodes. There's always new things that are being uncovered, and this was no exception. So I really appreciate that, and I hope people get a lot from this episode. I'm sure they will. I wish you the best of luck moving into your next role, because I know, we've spoken to a number of people that it's a challenge to be in this situation. It's always easier to find another job when you're in a job. So when you're in between roles, I know it can be challenging. So please continue to lean on the community. Anything we can do to help, please let us know. And we just wish you the best of luck.
Thank you so much, Mark. Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of your podcast. I'm quite honored.
It's a pleasure.
Hear what I know. And yes, no, absolutely. I will be following up and checking on future episodes. And if you need anything, let me know.
Wonderful. Lovely. Thanks so much, Alina.
Thank you.